Hey folks, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on Fat Burning Man, where we talk about real food and real results. Now, we all know that junk food is bad for us, but have you ever thought about why? Science demonstrates this startling fact. The food you choose to eat now has massive implications on the health of your children. Our diet doesn't just affect the expression of your genes, but also the genes that you pass on to your children and future generations. As a result, many of us are getting old too soon and settling for far less energy, health, and vitality than we all deserve. Today, you'll learn how to tweak your lifestyle and habits to make your wild genes thrive by harnessing the power of epigenetics. Before we get to the show, there's this. People are spending literally billions of dollars this time of year on shiny objects. But sooner or later, we all realize that stuff doesn't make us happy. Experiencing vibrant health does. So instead of buying more stuff this year, what if you invest in your own health? We've slashed the prices for the holidays to help you do just that. Check out our best-selling e-cookbook, The Fat Burning Chef, today to get over 200 plus delicious fat-burning, muscle-feeding recipes from the best cooks in paleo and beyond. As a limited-time bonus, you'll even get our Wild Holiday Feasts e-cookbook, which is a $27 value, completely for free. Adina says, mouth-watering meals in 20 minutes? I'm in. Janet says, love the idea of having meals in minutes. With my busy schedule, making time to cook from scratch can be difficult, so it's nice to have recipes that don't require me to spend hours in the kitchen. If you're looking for recipes that you can make quickly, easily, and on a budget, check out Fat Burning Chef at fatburningschef.com. But it's not just about the recipes. We also really believe in what we do, and we want to change the world with real food. So when you buy the Fat Burning Chef program, you get a free copy to give as a gift to share with family or friends. So help us spread this message of health and share it with the people you care about completely for free. All you have to do to get your discount and bonuses is go to fatburningschef.com. And if you just want to dip your toes into all of this, I have a ton of free content, including write-ups of every single podcast that we've been doing for the past year or so at fatburningman.com. When you sign up for my newsletter, you get a ton of free goodies, a free 7-day meal plan, and a quick start guide. So that's all at fatburningman.com. But on today's show, it's a special throwback episode with Gray Graham, author of Pottenger's Prophecy and expert in epigenetics. You're about to learn why cats don't eat margarine, how you can reprogram your genetic expression to live longer, why being 100% paleo or 100% vegan might actually be hurting you, what nutrition has to do with sexual dysfunction, and much more. All right, let's go hang out with Gray. All right, folks, today we're here with Gray Graham, and Gray is the lead author of the book Pottenger's Prophecy, which looks at the role that food may play in resetting our genes. How's it going, Gray?
It's going very good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited that you're here. This is a topic that a lot of people are starting to chatter about, epigenetics and Pottenger's Prophecy and all of that. But I think there aren't a whole lot of us out there who really understand what that means. So can you give us just a quick primer about what this new term epigenetics is all about?
Yeah, I think the concept has been around for a while, but it wasn't really accepted by conventional genetics. I was introduced to it when I got into the nutritional business about 21 years ago. My mentor, Dr. Bob Curry, one of his first assignments was for me to go to the Price Pottenger Nutrition Foundation and read 2 books that profoundly changed my thinking on nutrition forever. The first was Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston Price, which is a book that everybody should read, but every healthcare practitioner should be mandatory. Right. And the second one was a book about Dr. Francis Pottenger, who was a medical doctor, and he did this 10-year study with cats, and he was the first person to prove that in cats, at least, that what you eat not only affects your health, but affects the health of your offspring and their offspring and their offspring. And that's kind of the beginning of the story for me, because in my previous life, I had been involved in work that had me in schools. I was in the map business, and so I was in a lot of schools over a long period of time, and actually saw kind of a change in the look of the children. You go into a middle school, in And when I was in middle school, which was in the 60s, children looked a certain way. And let's face it, middle school, junior high school kids are always a kind of a motley looking crew.
Sure.
But, 15 years later, when I'm in the schools, it's another generation. They look decidedly different. And 15 years later, they look different again.
Yeah.
And I didn't really, even then I thought, you guys, the look of people is kind of changing, but I didn't really put it together till I read Pottenger's book, because Pottenger actually did the study and showed, with his cat studies, he did a lot of different ways, but basically the premise was he would take one group of cats and he would feed them only what he considered a whole, raw, natural diet of cats. It consisted of cod liver oil, raw meat, and raw milk. And then he varied the meat and the milk parts in a number of different studies, but what he found was the results were always the same, is that when you fed the cats an improper diet, a lot of people, I think, put a little overemphasis on the raw, but if you really say processed, the more he would, for example, in his most famous study, the more processed the milk was, the more degenerated the cats became, and their kittens became, and their kittens, and their kittens, really for 3 generations. And the things that happened. So when I looked around, when I read the book, and then I looked around kind of at the world, I thought, oh my gosh, we're a bunch of Pottenger's people,
Yeah.
because we're degenerating as a race in America faster than anybody, because we have the most highly processed diet. So in the cats, the things that happened, they changed structurally. Their faces became more narrow and had crowded teeth. So you see that, gosh, when I was in school, maybe one kid in 20 would have braces. But today, I know when my son was going at that same age, every single child in his school had braces.
Yeah.
So that's the effect of several generations of processed foods. And then the other thing that he found was there was sexual dysfunction, that the cats on the processed foods, they either lost interest in sex, or their sexual behavior became abnormal for cats, or one of the most profound things I think that has so much relevance today is the cats became desocialized. They either became reclusive or aggressive, sometimes both. They'd be very reclusive, then when they would socialize, they'd be very aggressive. So when you look at all these horrible tragedies that are happening from Columbine on, and when they define those children, it's almost always the same. They were socially maladapted, they'd become reclusive, and then they turned horribly violent. And when I remember when Columbine happened, it was so shocking for everybody, and they had days and days of, talking heads, talking about, oh, it's the video games, it's bad parenting, and really nobody even talked about the food that our children eat, or that their children ate. There was only like one clue. That there was one. They were interviewing the mother of one of the friends of those 2 young men, and she said they were just like all the other kids. She said they'd come over here and I'd give them soda pop and chips, and they'd watch movies and stuff like that. It's perfectly normal, but so the key is the soda pops and chip. That's not the type of nutrients that will support good mental health.
Yeah.
And particularly from a generational perspective. So
Right. And there's so much to talk about here, but this is kind of a new concept for a lot of people, I think, especially kind of dipping their toes into this whole, even thinking about diet, or how diet could relate to other effects in life. And not only that, but the lives of people in your progeny.
I know, your unborn children and grandchildren. Well, kind of, so let me make epigenetics as simple, the concept as simple as I can, because see, when Pottenger did his work, it was completely rejected by science, because at that time genetics said that you only pass down characteristics through your genes, and that the genes changed very, very slowly over long periods of times as they adapted, kind of the Darwin effect of evolution.
Yeah.
And so this idea that you could pass on nutritional deficiencies was completely unacceptable to science. So they just completely rejected it. And and it wasn't so much later. It was about the time that Pottenger was doing his work that the term epigenetics was coined, but it was practically unknown. And so the big things that happened is that there was a study in Överkalix, Sweden, an epidemiologic study that actually showed the same phenomena in humans. But basically, what epigenetics means is above the genes. So we do know that over long periods of times we adapt based on our environment and our diet. And you can see that around the world, that, the diet that say the Inuit people have adapted to and the diet that, Great Barrier Reef Islanders have adapted to is very different. And yet they're both very, very healthy with these kind of, significantly different diets in terms of everything, in terms of fat, in terms of content, in terms of, glycemic index and everything. So, but those changes do happen slowly over many, many, many generations. And so that's our genetic destiny, but our epigenetics change very quickly. I mean, you can go out and exercise and you will change the expression of your genes. If the meal that you eat will change the expression of your genes. So many people, use their genes as a cop out. They go, well, I'm diabetic, but my dad was diabetic, my grandfather was diabetic, so it was my genetic destiny. But that's really it's simply not true. Is that because if you go back 2 or 3 more generations, nobody was diabetic because they didn't have access to the foods that cause diabetes, the sugars and the highly refined starches. So what we know now is that only scientists argue about this. So we'll take the range. Only between 2 and 10% of the diseases that plague us today are genetic. And so that means that 90 to 98% are actually epigenetic. So it does have to do with your genes, but it has to do with how your genes are expressed. So what we know now is that genes can be turned on or off. Good genes can be turned off and bad genes can be turned on based on what we do in our environment. So primarily our food, but also the other powerful factors are exercise and toxins. So we know now that there's so many with all the herbicides and pesticides and industrial pollution and stuff, that those things also have a powerful ability to switch genes on and off. So we're, in some ways, it's a powerful message because it puts us back in control. We're not victims of our genes. Our genes are we have control of them, but we have to take back that control.
Yeah, and it's so neat because it's an interesting message, this whole epigenetics thing, or what we can take away from it. Because on one hand, we're learning that what we do, like you said, every meal that we eat, every bit of exercise that we do, and in fact, every thought that we have can have an effect on which genes we're actually expressing, which is really empowering. But at the same time, you have the immediacy of saying, if you don't do this, then your children will suffer.
Yeah. And I think that's very clear now. And so if you like, I'll talk a little bit about that over-calyx study, because I think it's really gave us another profound lesson. I mean, it basically just showed that the phenomena that Pottenger showed in the cats happened in people. And so what they did, there was a Swedish epidemiologist, and he got connected with a British medical geneticist. And they had this trove of data from a little town in the far north of Sweden called Over-calyx. I don't know how to pronounce that right, so my apologies to all our
I'm not going to correct you. I have no
Swedish,
idea.
Swedish speakers out there. Over-calyx or something like that. Anyway, I'm not going to try and pretend I have a good Swedish pronunciation.
You'll just get lampooned in the comments later. No big deal.
There we go. I'm sorry. Advance apologies. So what they did is that they found this town that kept immaculate records, and the other characteristic of this town was it was very isolated from the rest of the world in the winter. So in the summertime, they had transportation primarily by the rivers, and there was some roads. But as soon as the winter set in, the rivers froze over and the roads were closed down. So the only food they had was the food that they produced in their community. And so they kept these meticulous records about their crops and about the failure and success of their crops, so they could tell when they had abundance or scarcity of these particular nutrients. And then the other thing they kept meticulous records on were their birth and death rates. So they meticulously combed through all of this data, and what they found is that there's a time of our life when our epigenetics, when our genetics are being set based on our diet. It's a time of life called the slow growth period. So for girls, that's between the ages of 8 and 11, and for boys between the ages of 9 and 12. So it's that time just before puberty. And what a child eats then will what they eat at any time in their life will, of course, affect their health and the health of their progeny to some degree. But what they eat during that very critical time has a profound effect. So by following these records, they found that when the crops failed. So here, the original hypothesis, well, when people were didn't have enough food, when the crops failed, then the children would be undernourished and that their progeny would be less healthy. But what they actually found was the opposite. When the crops failed, and what they grew primarily was grains and potatoes, but when the grain and potato crops failed, the children that came of age, their slow growth period during that age, their children, their grandchildren, so that would be the great grandchildren of the parents at that time, lived up to 30 years longer than the children who came of age when the crops were abundant.
Wow.
So that's a huge. And what did they die from? You know, they died in times of abundance. Their grandchildren had a higher propensity towards obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. So does that sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah.
Now I had a disagreement with my co-authors. They came from, I'm kind of from the Price Pottenger, Weston A. Price kind of, mindset, and their previous background was as the science research director for Dean Ornish and his studies, and so they had come from a low-fat, a vegetarian type of perspective, and so here's our disagreement. So they said, well, here's what you can see is that when people don't eat much, they live longer.
Yeah.
And I'm going, well, there's really nothing in those records that said people didn't eat as much. What it said is that the potato and the grain crops failed. Now the other things that they ate were pork and salmon. And of course, in the summertime, of course, they had access to some greens and some berries, but that was very seasonal because this was so far north.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about logically now. This isn't what the scientists have said, but let me ask you this, Abel: if you were growing potatoes and grains and raising pigs and catching salmon, and the potato and grain crops failed, what would you be eating?
Bacon. Sounds
bacon,
like.
Right. And salmon. The first thing they do if they didn't have the feed to sustain them through the winter, they would slaughter the pigs and they would preserve them. Fortunately, both salmon and pigs, can be preserved, when appropriately cured for significant periods of time. So, I don't think I'm certainly not going to sit here and say definitively that it was the carbs that was making this huge effect. But I think if you look at a lot of the data that we have today, and if you look at the significant changes away from protein and healthy fats, since the 70s, and then you look at the results of the children today. I mean, my gosh, the Center for Disease Control said almost 15 years ago now that children born after the year 2000, that 35% of them would become diabetic in their lifetime, which is an amazing figure if you think about it. And it looks now, after 15 more years, it looks like it's going to be even worse. United Healthcare did a study, and they said that by 2050, that 50% of the people in America will be diabetic or pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say except that we're in a lot of trouble, and we have to change things. So getting back to Pottenger, so Pottenger had two messages. So when you gave these cats inappropriate diets, they degenerated over three generations. But actually, the way his study went is that each generation, he would measure their physical parameters of their health, and after they died, he would autopsy them, and he would take a look at their internal organs and things. But that experiment only lasted 3 years because the cats that were given the processed milk products, they, after the third generation, they couldn't reproduce anymore.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, is that a problem we see today? Or I think the figure something like 16 or 18% of Americans can't conceive and bear children without medical intervention.
Right.
But in the cats, they either lost sexual interest, or they had sexual activity but they didn't conceive, or they conceived, the kittens were born stillborn. And so what Pottenger did at that point, he said, well, I guess that's the end of the road, for this experiment. But he got to thinking to himself, could you, by the same process, could you regenerate the cats? So what he did is he started giving all the cats the control cat diet, And sure enough, just by making that change, the cats that couldn't conceive and couldn't bear offspring were able to conceive and bear offspring. And but the offspring weren't as healthy as the
Yeah.
control kittens. But he continued to feed them a whole food diet, and their kittens were healthier, and their kittens were healthier. And so here's the lesson: is that we can turn this thing around. It's a process, but it took 3 generations to degenerate the cats. But he was able to regenerate the cats in 4 generations to the point where they were as physically, emotionally, and structurally perfect as the control cats.
So in America, and this is a totally unfair question, but in America, where do you think most of us are generation-wise if we extend the metaphor to Pottenger's cats?
Well, I think the children, and of course, it's not as absolute because all the cats, was very carefully controlled. All the
Hmm.
cats were given a whole food diet, or partially processed, or more processed, or more processed, and but I'd say basically the children today, those children born after the year 2000, and who are now young adults, or not quite young adults, but they'd be as 12, 13. They've just come through their own slow growth period.
Hmm.
I'd say they're pretty much third generation.
Yeah.
They all got narrowed faces. They all wear braces. I mean, look at the stats. How many boys are diagnosed with ADHD?
Hmm.
The rate of autism is going through the roof. And then you look at these constant problems, and how many kids are so mal-socialized they can't even really attend public schools. There's a lot of the homeschooling today. Some of it's for personal choice. I'm not denigrating homeschooling. I think it
Sure.
can be a great idea, but a lot of times it's because the kids can't appropriately socialize. So I'd say we're pretty close to third generation, and
Yeah.
I think um, the consequences, people can't even grasp the consequences. So we're going through this whole debate now about Obamacare. Should we be providing health care? Should we not be providing health care? It's not even an issue. The real matter of the fact is that healthcare is so expensive and people are so sick that nobody can afford to pay for it. People
Yeah.
can't afford to pay it on their own, and people can't afford. Our government, our productivity isn't enough to pay for it. So
Yeah.
we have to change, our health, because the healthcare costs are burying us as a country. I mean, it's one of the reasons General Motors went bankrupt. They could no longer sustain
Hmm.
the cost of healthcare for their employees and their retirees, and you're seeing that more and more.
Yeah, and it's such a different way to think about all this. So a lot of people, when they first get started eating according to paleo, ancestral, Western price, they're just like, wow, real food is expensive. I don't think I can do this. Which, if
Uh,
you're comparing it to food at Walmart, I can see how you would come to that conclusion. But if you include the price of your medications, the price of your
mhm.
doctor visits, the price of all the things that are going to happen to you for the next few decades and all the things that are going to happen to your children, I mean, the
Yeah,
costs of healthcare, if that's included in your lifestyle, which I think it should be, all
yeah,
of a sudden
absolutely.
you're comparing dramatically different things. Like, so
Oh
if you
yeah.
look at, before I started eating this way, I went to the doctor and I got sick all the time. And I was taking many medications because my doctor said that I had to because of these genetic issues that I
Hmm.
had.
Yeah.
To skip ahead to now, I literally have not been to the doctor except to get blood work done from time to time just because I want to keep track of that myself in like
Right.
3 years. And so if you
I
look at
know.
no matter how much money you spend on eggs and
Hmm.
and organic veggies and at the farmer's market and everything else, that isn't even close to the amount of money that even someone in their 20s like me would have been spending at the medical establishment over that course of time. So I think that's a really good point. Including those things in the same category um,
Right.
is a good way to reframe this whole dietary change.
It's really critical because unfortunately, I'm in Washington State, and last week, Proposition 522, which would have caused mandated the labeling of genetic foods, was defeated because the food companies, Monsanto, Cargill, DuPont, and the Grocers Association put in like 20 some $million to the $3 or $4 million that was raised by people who just want to know what's in their food. So that cheap food is very profitable for big food, but it's very, very expensive for us. And
Right.
Michael Pollan, in his book, I got these figures right. He said that in 1950s we spent 18% of our budget on food and 5% of our budget on healthcare.
Right.
And today we spend 9% of our budget on cheap processed, industrial food, which is only half the price.
Hmm.
But now we spend 19% of our funds on healthcare.
Yeah.
So you're either going to spend it on the food and stay healthy. And by the
Hmm.
way, you get food that tastes better, that makes you feel better, and that gives you vitality. So you either spend it on the food and then save it on healthcare, or you save it on the food and you spend it on healthcare. But only an idiot would consciously make that choice. Oh, I'll eat cheap food and then I'll just take hypertensive medications and glucophage and inject myself with insulin and take statin drugs. With the savings. Like who
Yeah.
would make such a crazy choice? But that is actually the choice that people are making.
Yeah,
So when
absolutely. And I really take joy in going to the farmer's market every week and giving cash to farmers. Like there's
I
something
know.
that's very different than like going to the doctor's office and giving cash to a
Mhm.
doctor. Not that,
That's
I mean,
right.
there's some great doctors out there and they deserve every cent that they
Yeah.
get, but there are a lot of doctors who I think a lot of people would agree wouldn't really match up with that description. So when it
Right.
comes to what do you choose to spend money on, what are you choosing to support? That's a really interesting dichotomy between those two things. And I can tell
Yeah.
you, spending my money on truffle butter and blood sausage and
You're making me
duck and
hungry.
pastured eggs. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing. And these people are shiny eyed. You can see the health of the farmers you're buying this stuff from, which you always or you can't always see in the doctor's office, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know when you go into a hospital, it's the sickest people you ever will see. It not just the people that are there, but the people that are working there. And
Absolutely.
the food that they feed them in the hospitals is crazy. And good food's not really that expensive. So I've been quite involved in this movement. And one of the things I've done is started the Nutritional Therapy Association and created a whole new class of natural healthcare practitioners called NTPs, or Nutritional Therapy Practitioners. And one of my early graduates, we did some videos on her, and showed, and she's a low income person. She was raising three children on her own and on a nurse's pay and stuff. And so, obviously finances were a problem,
Hmm.
but she showed how you could take a chicken, an organic chicken that cost $10. Sounds like a lot for a chicken, but these are big chickens that were raised on a local farm by the farmer that we knew, and how you could feed a family of four, for essentially a week on a $10 chicken. Well,
Wow.
was it go to McDonald's? Was it cost to go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac, a shake, and some fries?
Yeah.
It costs about $10, and it totally denigrates your health.
Yeah.
People say, "Well, it's I don't have the time. I'm so busy, I don't have the time to cook." But even that, is not a legitimate answer. There's a lot of really healthy things that you can make yourself for a fraction of what it costs to get cheap, sick, fast food. So it's all just excuses. And I think
Hmm.
for the most part, I think that once people well, I guess that's both of our kind of callings, is educating people. Once people really get it, that you can take control, you can bring your food purchases back to local sustainable model, and you can enjoy the food more. It's going to taste better. It's going to make you feel better, and it's going to support your local economy, and it's just a win-win-win situation. Or you can go, to McDonald's or Jack in the Box, and you can get, genetically modified buns with, beef that's been feedlot raised with antibiotics and ketchup that's full of high fructose corn syrup, and you really do pay a lot for that in so
Yeah.
so many ways. So I don't. I remember, before I got into this field, I used to, was addicted to fast food too, and I
Hmm.
remember going into McDonald's and thinking, "Oh man, I love the smell of those French fries," and but really, the only reason I go to McDonald's now is if I'm driving down the freeway and I have to go to the bathroom. That's the only
Yeah.
only legitimate service McDonald's plays in America today, is providing restrooms that are relatively clean. But you walk in there and the smell of that rancid grease almost makes you puke. Once
Yeah.
you're healthy, you really realize that that's really not good food. So
That's so true, isn't it? That the same things that used to appeal to me. I'm just thinking actually of, we used to go to fairs growing up, and
Okay.
there's the fair food, and which is just notorious with those little carts that have been clattering around with the same vat of grease that they've been using probably for 12 years. And
Oh
like, I
yeah,
remember
gosh, horrible.
fast food and fair food used to smell so good, but if I go back now, which I still do, or I might, take a rest stop at one of those places, so you get the wafting of that chemically
Hmm.
rancid,
Hmm.
salty smell of fast food,
Yep.
and what used to make me salivate now makes me a little bit nauseous. And I think that
Hmm.
really, it's hard to explain if you haven't experienced it, but if you
It
get
is.
away from that stuff for a few months and you just focus on eating real food, I promise that'll happen to you too. And
It
you want
really
it.
does.
You want it. It sounds bad, but you want it to happen to yourself, because
Yeah,
then
yeah,
you
yeah.
you have such an appreciation for the quality of food. And your body, I mean, your body knows. If
It does.
you get out of your body's way and let it, if you follow that natural intelligence, if you're eating real food, your body
Right.
knows, in the same way that, you know, a dog in a lot of cases will know that something has been, you know,
Hmm.
messed with a little bit. Sometimes, I mean, they'll fall for it too, but
Yeah.
there's this intelligence there where if something looks good, that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not it's good for you.
That's why when I'm teaching my classes, one thing I talk about is that, all lower animals have the sense to only eat food. So, for example, margarine, which is not food,
Hmm.
that a cat won't eat it, rats won't eat it, flies won't eat it. So if you take a stick of margarine, which is this highly processed, hydrogenated vegetable oils that are really poisonous, and put it on a windowsill, and then you take a stick of butter and put it right next to it, the butter will become moldy. Flies will come on it. If the cat can get to it when it's still fresh, it'll eat it, et cetera, et cetera. But nothing will touch the margarine,
Hmm.
because they all are picking their foods based on their instinctual knowledge, and we have within us that same instinct, which but we exploit in the nutritional therapist classes, where we do what's called lingual neural testing. But what we've done is we've replaced our instinctual ability to choose our food with our intellect. So now
Hmm.
we don't choose based on what our body's telling us. We choose based on what our mind's telling us.
Hmm.
And so we make these bad decisions. We eat margarine. That's why I tell everybody that no lower animal, only humans and stupid dogs eat margarine. Because because there's some dogs that if you eat it, they will eat it, because that's just what they do.
Yeah.
That they too have lost their ability to differentiate. But no cats, no other animals will eat margarine except for us and stupid dogs.
Yeah.
Smart dogs won't even eat it. So
I
that's good.
remember it was a few months back, we put out a picture that I don't even know where we found it, but there was a picture of butter and a picture of margarine. Maybe you've seen it, and it's just looking at what happens over the course of the weeks. And the butter,
Yeah.
like you said, there are all these ants that have basically annihilated the stick of butter, and then the stick of margarine, there are like a couple of dead ants on it, and it's perfectly
Yeah.
intact. And that's all. That's all that's happened. It's
That's
shocking. Now, can we touch upon? I'd love to hear you talk about, Gray, the what precisely happens when a food is processed. What's going on there? Why is it bad?
Well, I mean, there's so many different types of processing. There's types of our ancestral ways of processing food, like
Hmm.
fermenting and drying and stuff. They can not only can preserve the integrity of the food, but they, in some cases, culturing vegetables or things like that, can actually enhance the quality of the food.
Hmm.
But everything in modern food has really become about shelf life and profitability. So they use the cheapest ingredients, as they do everything they can to make it so that it won't spoil. And the one universal thing about spoilage is that something can only spoil if it has the vitality to support, you know, microbial organisms. So it
Hmm.
can't, if it's not, if it won't support the life of a bacteria or yeast, then it can't spoil. So highly refined sugar, you know, su so sugar, if you take a piece of sugar cane, and juice it, and you leave that juice out, it will spoil because it's full of vitamins and minerals. It's got things like chromium and B vitamins in it, and it will sustain life. But if you completely refine that, it won't sustain life. And, a pound of sugar, will last almost forever. with the exception of ants, almost nothing will. And the same is true with flour. I mean, the reason that we have white flour is because when we invented, these processes for milling our grains in mass quantity, and so now we had the ability to mill them very cheaply. But if you left the germ in um, uh, the outer layer in the germ, then they would have a propensity to turn rancid and spoil very quickly. But when you turn it into white flour, it'll last, it'll last for years. So this whole processed oil thing, so I think it shows we're making progress. It's very slow, but margarine and hydrogen oils have been around for 85 years, and this week, just this very last week, after 85 years, the federal government, in their infinite non-wisdom, has finally decided that these are toxic and these shouldn't be in the food supply. So we now know definitively, how long it takes the federal government, the people who are supposed to protect our food, how long it takes them to figure out that a food is toxic and is killing people. And that's about 85 years. So if anybody's relying on the government to, protect our food supply, you're going to be waiting, another 3 or 4 generations,
Yeah.
So,
and that's the key word, 3 to 4 generations, right?
Yeah, that's right. And most of in the places where they're getting rid of the hydrogenated oils, now they're replacing it with things that are probably as bad or maybe even worse. These interesterified fats may be worse than hydrogenated fats for all the same reasons. But don't worry, within 80 to 85 years, the federal government should figure out that and then make the food makers take that out of our food supply. So, we have to take control. You cannot trust the government to guide you. They've been highly manipulated by big food and big agriculture, and people need to start using some common sense, kind of get back to our local sustainable food sources.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. I was actually forwarded this movie many times before actually watching it for the first time last night by listeners of the show. Actually sent me a bunch of notes. They're just like, you need to watch this. Soylent Green, for being coming out in the 70s is incredibly prophetic. What they said 40 years ago about like this fake food made out of soy being sold to everyone as the new health food and marketed in all these crazy ways. I mean, my Lord, that's exactly what happened.
I know, it's crazy, huh? I was got this little skit about like, so how do most things end up in our food supply? It's usually there's some waste product that nobody knows what the hell to do with, and they're looking at this little story about how we got hydrogenated cottonseed oil in our food supply, and I go, well, probably started somewhere where there was a couple of executives from a major cotton gin, and they're looking at these huge piles of cotton seeds, stacking up outside the factory, and they're going, well, what the hell are we going to do with all this cotton seed? And one of them looks at the other one and goes, I don't know, the cows won't eat it, they're too smart. And they go, well, what we could do is we could turn it into oil, hydrogenate it, and tell people it's a health food. We'll tell them it's a polyunsaturated fat that's good for them. I'm sure they'll buy it, and unfortunately that's true, So likewise with the reason we have some soy does have one redeeming quality, and that's that it puts nitrogen into the soil, and that's one of the reasons that farmers started growing so much of it. But there was not much demand in our culture for soy, and so they took this probably at the very best, under the best of circumstances, a barely acceptable or mediocre food, and then and they highly processed it and tried to put it in every imaginable concoction, and tell us that it's good for us. And most, I'm not a complete soy hater, I mean, I think. Sure. I think there are people, if you're Asian and your ancestors have been eating soy for 10,000 years and it's properly prepared, which of course in our culture it never is, and fermented, it can be a healthy food. But for somebody of Northern European descent, and particularly the way it's prepared, just really doesn't have any place in our diet. So
yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing that's really interesting, and you touched upon this earlier, was the Ornish camp and the kind of low fat ideology about all of this is deeply intertwined with the whole epigenetics concept. And a lot of the studies have been done by folks who kind of lean in that direction. So could you comment a little bit on the differences between, say, the Weston A. Price approach and then the low fat approach? Sure.
Well, we could spend an hour just talking about the variations in diet. And so in Ornish's program, he never really just took a dietary approach. He always took a multifaceted approach, which I'm not denigrating, but he took a very low-fat diet, and then he took appropriate exercise, meditation, and social interaction. He put all those things together, and he did show, there's no doubt about it, that he could reverse heart disease and that he could stop or reverse the progression of slow-moving cancers. But having said that, I don't really agree with his diet. That there's redeeming parts to his diet. One of the redeeming parts is that there was almost no processed foods in it, and so I think here's my general words of wisdom: is any diet that doesn't have processed food, whether it's low fat or high low fat or high fat, is healthier than any diet that does contain processed foods, whether it's low fat or high fat. So one of the things that always ends up happening with vegetarian studies is they'll take a group of vegetarians, like say maybe Seventh-day Adventists or something, who are eating whole, nutritious vegetarian foods, and then they'll compare it against an American diet where they're eating, feedlot red meat, and they're eating hydrogenated oils, and they're eating refined grains, and they're so it's the standard American diet, and so they're comparing a low-fat or vegetarian non-processed food diet with a high-fat processed food diet, and it's not a fair comparison. So and then I think there's also a distinction that people need to make, is the difference between a diet that will sustain a person over the long period, a healthy lifetime diet, and a therapeutic diet.
Right.
Because we do know that there are times when diets like a macrobiotic diet or a vegan diet can be therapeutic for some people for a period of time, but that does not mean that it's the diet for that person for their life. So, have you ever had Anne-Louise Gittleman on your show? She's I
haven't.
She's always up for talking about these things too. And Anne-Louise and I are pretty good friends.
Cool.
And she wrote Beyond Pritikin and the Fat Flesh Diet and a number of other things. But anyway, I was talking to her and her partner James, and James was a Texas rancher and had gotten cancer. I believe it was colon cancer, but I wouldn't swear to it. But anyway, he rejected the idea of chemo and radiation, and he went on a macrobiotic diet, and lo and behold, he cured his cancer. So what happens when people make a dietary change like that and it works for them and they feel better, that's good. But they make the mistake of thinking, well, it worked for me during this period of time, so this is the diet I should maintain for the rest of my life. And that's what James did. But what he found was that though he cured his cancer, over time he started to lose his vitality. And he finally came to the conclusion that the diet that was right for him when he had cancer was not the diet that would. So he went back to a more balanced diet, a non-macrobiotic diet, but a diet that was nutritious, whole food, nutrient-dense, whole food, balanced diet that included meat and was low glycemic, and he got his vitality back. So he cured his cancer and he has his vitality. So I think that's what we all want to look for, is the diet that will sustain us over the long period.
That's such a good point. And I also wonder too, the difference between, when you talk about, obviously the cats who ate a processed diet encountered damage, but was that because they were eating foods that damaged them, or was it because they weren't eating enough of nutritious foods that nourish them?
Well, I think it's probably both.
Right.
So looking at the cats, just more clarity on the cats, the most famous study was one where they all got a base of raw meat and cod liver oil. So obviously a very good base diet, and then the other half of their diet was either raw milk, pasteurized milk, condensed milk, or sweetened and condensed milk. And what you can see is each one of those is more processed with heat, processed with heat and condensation, and processed with heat and sugar added. I always say, my gosh, if the PETA people got hold of Pottenger today, they'd rip them, because that's a cruel and horrible thing to do to a cat, to give it milk that's not only condensed, but also it's processed with sugar added. Who would do that to a poor innocent cat?
Yeah.
But then again, that's exactly what we're doing to our children.
Right. That's a really good point.
Breakfast of sugar frosted Cocoa Puffs and low fat milk, and they're basically getting the worst of of the Pottenger diet. So
Hmm.
it really is both of those things. It doesn't have the nutrients that they need to sustain themselves. The nutrients are denigrated by the heat, and
Hmm.
then you add things like sugar that actually disrupt the normal glycemic control mechanisms of the body. So it's just a horrible combination, and it is the diet in America. So highly processed with lots of sugar added. That's what most people are eating, even though they don't necessarily realize that.
Yeah. I ask because it's such an interesting distinction, right? Most people assume that if you have success with a diet, or if you go vegan, paleo, South Beach, whatever, that it's
Right.
because of the diet that you're getting better. When in many cases, I think people tend to overlook it's that they're not pummeling their bodies with toxins and bad
Right.
food that's damaging them anymore. So even
Right.
if they ate nothing, or some of these, having great success with juice fasts or eating almost nothing for a long period of time, it's not because like cayenne and maple syrup and lemon juice are great for you in and of themselves necessarily. It's because you're not eating Taco Bell anymore.
Right.
Right.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
That's one thing. So for I know I've been criticized being a bit harsh on vegans, but I don't mean to be. But I know people are desperately seeking health. But here's what I see happen so often is that people are eating this highly processed standard American diet, and it's wrecking them.
Hmm.
And so they go on a vegan diet, and it's clean. Hopefully, there's where I went to the Evergreen State College for several years, not that long ago, and there was a lot of junk food vegan. So that's really the worst
Yeah.
alternative of all.
Yeah.
But for the most part, the raw food vegan movement, they're eating raw whole foods, and for most of them, they get their vitality back. They lose weight, their complexion clears up, their sex drive returns, and they just generally feel better.
Hmm.
Their allergies clear up, et cetera, et cetera. And so they go, I found it. I found my place in the universe. I'm a vegan. I'm a raw food vegan. And as the time goes on, though, that diet eventually turns on them because they do tend to be very high glycemic.
Hmm.
So one of my friends, she was actually a student, and she got on the vegan thing, and she said, I feel great. She said, well, you've always, Pottinger, you've always advocated raw food diet. And I said, well, I do advocate a raw food diet, but I said, drink some raw milk and eat some raw eggs and have some raw liver and stuff like that, along with the pecans and the pumpkin and the all the other raw things you're doing are wonderful, but you need to balance it based on your genetics as Northern European descended person with these other raw foods. Then I'm
Hmm.
all for it.
Yeah.
But what I saw actually with her, I didn't mention her name, so I don't want to be critical, but what happened was she felt better, but then eventually her blood sugar became dysregulated. She started to get moody, and then she started to gain weight again. And unfortunately, what a lot of times people do is they go, well, gosh, veganism worked for me, but I'm just not being a good enough vegan. So they just try harder and harder to be a better vegan.
Yeah.
But having said that, I recently had a student in one of the classes I just graduated, and he's been a vegan for 13, 14 years, and it completely saved him and he's doing fine. So
Hmm.
so he just seems to be the individual for whom, but he's very, very diligent about it. He eats no processed foods. He's very careful about getting the protein that he needs, et cetera. And so really, I feel like I'm really qualified to tell how somebody's doing because what I teach is these physiological tests that measure, how people are doing in life, and he's doing great. And
Yeah.
so our agreement was that, I'll support his veganism as long as his veganism is supporting him. And we talked about some of the things that I'd observed, and he agreed that if he saw those things happening, that he would shift his diet, start including animal products again, because his goal was to be healthy. He wasn't on a religious quest, he was on a health quest. And so I think that's fair. I know your main thing is paleo, but paleo. So I'll probably get some bad blogs on this one, but paleo doesn't work for everybody. There
Hmm.
are a group of people for whom good, properly prepared grains can be a healthy part of their diet. Now, not most people,
Right.
but some people. But are you familiar with Gary Nabham's work? He wrote a book called Why Some Like It Hot, And no,
A little bit, yeah.
okay, well, he kind of helped shift my thinking a little bit on that as a person who was you know I've become a bit inflexible, in my thinking about what could be healthy for people. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd kind of come over to got to get the grains out. What you need for breakfast is you need protein, and but I had observed, that for some people it was wonderful, but for some people it wasn't.
Right.
One particular, there was a couple that he was a medical practitioner and she was his nutritionist, and he had some huge blood sugar issues going on. Man, I got him eating 3 eggs and just a little bit of cultured veggies and some other protein, and he was like a new man.
Yeah.
But for her, it didn't work. It wasn't until she added some high quality grains back in that she really felt her very best again.
Yeah.
So and anyway, in Nabham's book, he really does explain that phenomena that we do adapt over time to our environment, the food that's available in our environment. And so, just like an Inuit person,
Hmm.
can eat a diet that's 80%, 85% fat and thrive. If you were to take an Asian person who's from or a Great Barrier Reef Islander, for example, who mostly were eating fruits and low-fat fish,
Hmm.
and you switch those diets, neither one of them would thrive because they've evolved for tens of thousands of years on those types of diets.
Yeah.
But that some people are um, like in my book I talk about and quoting Nabham actually, that if you take indigenous Australian people, Aborigines, and try and give them milk, that like 78% of them have no ability to digest lactose as adults.
Right.
But if you take a Fulani herdsman from Africa, and they've been consuming dairy for thousands of years themselves, still 28% of them are still lactose intolerant.
Wow.
But if you take the Swedish population, his ancestors have been consuming dairy products for somewhere in the vicinity of 12,000 years now. Only 2% of them don't have the ability to digest lactose.
Yeah.
So we do adapt. We adapt slowly. But the other thing Nabham says very clearly is that whenever we make a major shift in our diet, there's horrible consequences in the short term, and
Hmm.
that it takes many, many generations to adapt. And so, whatever. I mean, I think the biggest argument for paleo. And I'm very sympathetic to my diet is primarily, a paleo diet, but but part of the problem is that our grains have been so
Right.
denigrated, through hybridization and now genetic modification, that they are not the grains that we're adapted to.
Exactly. Yeah. And
So
so one of the reasons that I identify with paleo isn't necessarily because I'm 100% paleo. And anyone who listens to the show knows that very well. It's more because if you're telling people that you eat in a particular way, then saying paleo works, because
mhm.
if you're going to get grains today, it is so complicated to try to not only source them, but treat them correctly in the way that they're supposed to be fermented uh,
Right.
and cooked or not cooked or sprouted, and all of this gets really, really complicated. So it's easier just to say, stick with the paleo diet at the beginning. We can sort out all of these intricacies a little bit later. So I
Right.
think in terms of like a diet that's something that people could identify with, it's one that works fairly well, and it's a good launching pad into this whole it's to be honest, it's a very complicated lifestyle. It takes a little while to get a handle on all the ins
Yeah.
and outs, but it's the best thing you can do for your health. And with that, we're just about out of time, Gray, but why don't you tell folks where they can find you and what you're working on?
Okay. Well, my one of my biggest projects is the Nutritional Therapy Association. So we started a profession, nutritional therapy practitioners, and so we train in conjunction with community colleges and our own venues around the country, and now soon around the world. Practitioners called nutritional therapy practitioners and now nutritional therapy consultants. And so you can get more information on that whole movement at nutritionaltherapy.com. And I do have, I think my book has been well received, but it's probably a bit technical for a lot of people. So I do have plans in the not too distant future to kind of do a Reader's Digest version of Pottenger's prophecy for as like all my friends who are into natural health, and all the practitioners, they love the book. But as far as I know, I don't have actually one relative that's made it through it, because I don't know those big words, so okay. I know epigenetics is a big word.
A lot of my listeners are nerdy like me, so I'm sure that they're going to love it.
Okay. Yeah. And so you can also go to my website, pottengersprophecy.com, and order the book there, e-version or a hard copy. And I think people that are into it love it, and there are some great lessons in the book. And so anyway, thanks, Abel, for having me. That's been fun.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming on. I would love to talk to you soon again about epigenetics and all these other intricacies of living this way, like I was talking about before. But in the meantime, thank you so much for coming on.
You bet. Take care.
You too.
Hey, this is Abel, and I have a quick question for you. Do you want to get in the best shape of your life without giving up your favorite foods? Don't miss your opportunity to get the new Fat Burning Chef e-cookbook featuring more than 200 delicious recipes from the top paleo chefs in the world. You can get it now for a huge discount at fatburningchef.com. You can type it in from any device. Keep on listening for the details.
Meet Jane. Jane knows she's supposed to eat right, but it's been one heck of a long day and she's short on time to cook a healthy, delicious dinner. Jane knows she can get lean by choking down reheated chicken breast and steamed broccoli 6 times a day for the next 3 months, but that doesn't sound like very much fun. Fortunately, Jane's in luck because her friend just sent her a collection of over 150 quick and easy recipes that just so happen to keep the pounds off. It's called the Fat Burning Chef. And through the magic of the interwebs, this handy, interactive digital cookbook beams straight to you instantly. And since it lives on your iPhone, iPad, Droid, computer, or other gizmo, you'll never be without quick and easy fat-burning meals. But it's not just about mouth-watering recipes. We want to change the world with real food. When you grab the Fat Burning Chef, you get another copy as a free gift to share with your friends and family. So if you're short on time and want to know what's for dinner tonight, head on over to fatburningchef.com and we'll fix you right up. Bon appetit, Jane.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Fat Burning Man. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, the podcast app, or wherever else you might be listening to or watching this show. Got a second? Please leave me a quick review on iTunes. I always love hearing from you, and if you think someone else might like and benefit from this free show, please take a second to share it with a friend or with a family member. You can get in touch with me on Twitter at FatBurnMan and Facebook by typing in Abel James or Fat Burning Man. Drop me a line anytime. Did you know that I've recorded over 150 episodes of Fat Burning Man, winning 4 awards in independent media and hitting #1 in more than 8 countries? And here's some more good news. You can download and listen to every single episode for free. All you have to do is type in fatburningman.com. I'll give you a second to type it in, fatburningman.com. And you'll get all the show notes in video and audio versions for all the past episodes of Fat Burning Man. Better yet, enter your best email at fatburningman.com, sign up for my newsletter, and I'll even send you a quick start guide to start burning fat right now and a few of our ridiculously tasty recipes as a special thanks for signing up. Once again, just go to fatburningman.com right now, enter your best email to get your free fat burning download straight to your inbox, and make sure that you never miss a show again. This is Abel James signing off. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week.
Favorite traditional indigenous foods, and of course I'm Lakota also, and we're a buffalo hunting culture. So anytime I can get my hands on some good bison meat, loving it. But again, a lean, quality protein, quality source of animal fat, and that's what we're all about.